Hello.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Today I have with me Mr. Jayanta Majumder. Mr. Majumdar has a variety of interest areas in mathematics, physics, and art. He has also worked with large companies like Autodesk, Schneider Electric, Lockheed Martin, to name a few. He graduated from IIT Kharagpur and also was interested in mathematical Olympiads, where he scored quite well. Today, we will be hearing from him about one of the projects that he and his wife, Shikha Majumdar, and his son also contributed to that, from Buddha Majumdar. This particular project involves a text editor for programmers, which, among many things, which improves comprehension of the program that is being written. So I'll hand it over to Joyantada. So yeah, you can go ahead and start.
Thank you, Ashwini. Thanks for the kind introduction. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, it's
Okay,
audible.
I'm hearing an echo. So, yeah, I would be talking about this text editor which we developed, which grew out of a bit of a hobby project on the side. So, what happens is when you work as a professional programmer, you tend to develop tools around the editors and the uh, programming environments that you use. And since I was a C++ developer, I used to develop my tools around Visual Studio. And this was in a language called Visual Basic for Applications that used to come with Visual Studio. But in 2012, Microsoft decided to take that out. That is, it no longer supported that VBA addition to Visual Studio. So I decided that it's best to have my own tooling around my own text editor so that I don't have to rely on the whims and fancies of big companies. So I'll, I'll first start with a bit of a demo and then maybe look at the code a bit and explain the philosophy around the thing. So, as you know, that source code is almost always in text format. That is, it's a text file, uh, and the compiler or interpreter looks at the text file, it compiles it, and then makes an executable out of it, which runs. And um, a lot of effort goes into understanding code that others have written, right? So you'd as a professional, most of the time you'd be uh, working on code that others have written, and you have to understand what is going on. And in that process, it helps to have certain features that kind of speeds up your comprehension. uh, I'll just give a simple example. We are looking at this source code. I've written it many years ago, maybe 18 years ago, I think. And no, 19 years ago. So, and this I've forgotten completely. But when I'm trying to read it, it helps if I am able to just click on a variable and see where it's being used and how it's being used. So when I click on different things, I see all of them are lighting up in a particular color. And I've noticed that this feature helps with understanding what is going on. To be able to see, okay, this is how E1 is getting used, this is how E2 is getting used, and so on. So this is a very simple feature. It takes just 5 minutes to implement in code, 5 or 10 minutes to implement in code. But it saves a lot of time when I'm reading through a large code base and trying to figure out what is going on. Uh, so uh, this was the initial thing that I had implemented, and over time, lots of features got added to the code base. And I'll go through some of them now in the form of a demonstration. Say, uh, you have a large code base and all you have is the text. I found it's useful to be able to add information to the code in addition to what is already possible in text. So in text, you can write comments, as you all know. So you can add some comment which tells something about it. But sometimes, when specifically in mathematical programming, it helps to add some diagrams and such things. And what we came up with was a rich text format that supports all these different types of annotations, like putting pictures or adding notes or audio and things like that. And if it maintains the coherence between the source code and this annotated version, then you don't have any additional overheads about keeping them in sync. So as you are coding in this environment where you are adding the diagrams, adding additional notes, adding audio and such. And the source code is getting modified at the same time. Say you are changing the code slightly, or changing something in the code or adding a diagram. So all these things are happening in the same place. I'll just show you an example. Let's say this is just a graphical editor. I'll draw something here. This is this text editor is not mine. This is not text editor. This graphics editor is not mine. I'll just draw something using this graphics editor. So let's say I'm drawing a diagram, a triangle. Let's say ABC. Say something. It's not relevant. I could have drawn anything really, but let's say this diagram is relevant to this code. Then what I could do is I can take a snip of it. Now you can of course do these things using Microsoft Word and such, but if it stays in the code, that is more useful. So the code is also getting modified, and these things are also getting added to it. You can add notes. So you can say something like, you can add something very big, maybe many pages of text that would otherwise take up a lot of real estate in your thing. Say you have a theory paper or something that you want to associate with this function. But if you put it in a comment, then that takes up a lot of space. So you have to scroll around a lot. But if you put it in note, it stays associated with this area. It just that whenever you need it, you can click on it here and see that theory. So I just added some other code, but it could have been some maybe description of what this intends to do, or uh, something like that. Yeah, and you could add audio recordings using one of the features. Let's say I am in a meeting and we are talking about this code with some people, and you can just use this feature called insert audio recording that just records whatever I am talking about and keeps it in context. So you'll see that once I stop recording, it will just add a little button here. And when someone presses that button, that same audio will play. Yeah.
Wow, that's very nice.
So uh, there are many more things you can associate. You can insert video. You can insert hyperlink. Oh, hyperlink is something I found quite useful. Say I have written something here and I have written a comment here. So I just wrote some random comment, and let's
Okay.
say I want to associate this particular with this uh, text here. So I select the two. When I press Control, it allows me to select multiple things. And now I pressed Control H, and that created a hyperlink. Here, the hyperlink is not terribly useful in that it's in the same part of the screen. But just imagine that this might be here, whereas this might be in a very far away part of the code. And I associate a hyperlink, then you still jump to that part of the code when you click here. Yeah, it just tells you that this refers to this bit of the code. I thought that is useful sometimes. And there are these different types of features, and we can save it as HTML. This whole thing that we are annotating, this saves as an HTML. I'll show you. Say I export this as HTML. Yeah.
Right.
So the HTML also has those hyperlinks. When you click here,
And the audio will also be there.
it will be there. The audio is this was the audio, right? Or this was no, this was the note. Let me
Note.
find out
Yeah, yeah.
where this was the audio. So when you click it,
I see.
and it's not as if these things are not outside the HTML. The images are not separate from the HTML. It's embedded using a base 64 encoding within the HTML. If you view source, you can see all those embedded blocks. View source. Where is view source?
I think the inspect button, right?
Is it? I always thought there was a view source
Oh, yeah.
feature.
View
But,
source.
huh?
View
Do you
page
see
source.
view page source? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, it's my blind spot. So you see all these blocks. These are so this is a self-contained HTML that has all those things.
Oh, wow.
So it's not a separate image file or separate audio file. It's all inside the HTML. So as if you can send this out by email to someone, and they will have all the images and everything just as a single file. It's not as if it's an HTML which refers to some image in the folder. Yeah.
Right.
Written many editing features. You can press Alt Control, and that allows you to make a rectangular selection, and then you can add things that go in all of those locations. You may have used this in other editors. You can see
Right.
it's adding this in all those places.
Right. Right. Right.
And you can even, let's say you want to enumerate these things. Let's say you want to put 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes it happens that you want to put numbers against these. So you can use a command called enumerate starting with 1. Then it just adds numbers before these things. It's sometimes useful when you are editing. So there are lots of commands like this. There are as many as 250 commands the last time I checked that does
Wow.
little things like that. Say this is uh, in camel case, as it is called. Now if I want to turn it into snake case, snake case where the words are separated by underscore, whereas camel case is where words are separated by an uppercase.
Right. Right.
Those things, like those are some uh, some convenient features. There are 250 of those. I don't want to go through all of them. Uh, an interesting aspect of this tool is that it's very extensible. That you can add plugins very easily. And a plugin is something that you write using a programming language called Tickle. Tickle is one of the earliest scripting languages. It's very similar to Bash shell scripting language, somewhat similar to Perl. I don't know if you are familiar with it. Uh, but it's not so popular anymore, but it's very convenient. It's something from the 80s, 1980s. So everything is done in a very compact manner. I will give you a quick overview of the Tickle language at this point, just to show you how it looks. So you have procedures. It's just like any other language. Actually, you can just get a maybe 4-page summary of the entire language. You have something like Tickle cheat sheet. If you Google, then you can find what the language is. It's like any other language. I'll give you a little programming example. Say I want to write a factorial function in Tickle. So I'll write a proc factorial, and it takes a parameter, which is the number whose factorial you're trying to find out. And like any other language, it's just you need to know a little bit about the syntax. When you're referencing a variable, you precede it with dollar and things like that. But it looks not too different from C++ or Perl or things like that. So I'll just write this program. So I'm writing a factorial program, and I'm saying if n is less than 2, then the answer is 1. Else we use that recursive definition, which is this is also a feature of Spectral, where you press Control M, and that shows you the matching bracket.
Mhm.
So, so this is the program. So if it is less than 2, it returns 1. Otherwise, it returns n times factorial of n minus 1. Let us run this. I'll execute this as a script and then call factorial. So factorial of 10. So it's worth learning this language. It's quite a small language. I've pretty much covered everything that you need in the language. You need if, else. There's a for loop, there's a while loop, and things like that. I think in one day you can learn this language. And what this enables is writing any automation task that you need to include. So you can add any menus that you see here. You can add additional menus anywhere, and you can add what the behavior is. So there is a special command called editor that returns the text. That returns the text element, text area element that this editor panel is, and then you can use all the different things that you normally use. And now let me go a bit bottom up. So this was a brief overview of the language, and I'll give you a brief glimpse of what the graphics library of this language looks like. So as you know that a text editor these days, when you are writing it, it's usually already available in the libraries. So you do not need to write a text editor from absolute scratch. you already get some text area type elements like you do in HTML, right? For example,
Right.
in an HTML, if you have a text area, you probably are familiar with HTML. It just is a matter of writing a text area element, and that itself gives you a thing where you can edit things. So just these 14 lines of HTML that gives you an area to edit, right? Where you can type things. So this is a very rudimentary example of a text editor. Now, if you use Tickle, you can see that it's not much bigger than that to just have a very basic text editor. You can just create a text element. This is saying that this is asking the Tickle interpreter to create a text element called dot text with some width and height, and then it's allowing it to pack that thing into the text editor, sorry, into the window. So if I run this script, uh, you'll see a very rudimentary text editor, which is just a matter of just a box where you can edit things. Now, when you want to add behavior to it, I have an example of adding a little bit of behavior to this text editor. So I just wrote this little thing using this little thing is a double click handler. What I'm saying here is that in this text element, I want to handle the double click event. So this is where I am saying that I want to bind the double click event with a bit of code. And that bit of code calls a function called on double click. And this function is what handles the double click event for this window. And what it does is it finds out where the mouse click has happened, double click has happened, and then it finds the text index where it has happened, and at the start of the word and until the beginning of until the end of the word, it adds a style. It's very similar to HTML CSS styles where you say have a span with a particular class name, and you associate some property like a font or some underline or whatever, the background color in an HTML element. Here, similar to the class, you have a tag in this graphics library, and you're adding, in this case, a tag called XX, and that tag has the property called background is light blue. So let me put this code into the same running program. So what I'm going to do is I have chosen to show the console window alongside, and now I have just inserted the code into the running program. Program was already running, so I'll just add something. I'll copy some random text, maybe from here anywhere. And I want to show you that this is some random text. As you see, when I'm double clicking, it's turning that word into blue. And to implement this feature, all I needed to do was add this little bit of code. It's not much code, so I can add that code to the text area itself. So I can just add this bit of code here, so that from now on, when I load this 17-line program, that behavior will be a part of it. Let me launch this minimal program now, and then let me copy some text again here. So I'll copy this text. Now that double click behavior is a part of this code. So just in 17 lines of code, this Tickle library allows you to implement this behavior.
Right.
So just to give you an overview of what this language is like, and we now live in the future. We now live in a post GPT world, as it is called, and you don't even have to write these sort of programs. You can just ask GPT to write it for you. You can just say, please write a tickle program that handles a double click in a text widget and adds the tag XX from word start to word end at the cursor position. And it writes it for you. So even that, the initial program, which was to open a window with a text area filling the whole space, all I it was, please write a tickle take a script that displays an 800 times 800 text area, and that was it. So, uh, and I like to point out that this sort of code comprehension functionality is all the more useful in the post GPT world, because even previously you could have been the original author of all of the code, but in the future you would almost always be using a co-pilot, that is an AI that would be working with you. So you'd ask it to do something and the AI will write the code for you, but there is no guarantee that there is no 100% guarantee that it will work. So a lot of the time you get some generated code and then you have to figure out what's going on, what is it doing, and things like that. So a text editor that uh, allows you to understand it easier. Because this is very easy on the eyes, right? This font is not big, but you can increase the font, of course. But when you get all these different colors, you can see what is going on instead of reading everything. Especially if you're dyslexic, like I am, it helps a lot. Uh, so you can increase the font sizes and all that, makes it easier. So that was a bit of an overview. How are you doing with the time, Osoni? How long
Yeah,
do
I
we?
mean, I think we have some time left. If you want, you
Okay,
can extend, I guess. But I do have a, I don't know whether it's okay to ask questions right away. But I
please do,
have a,
please do.
when I was like hearing this, uh, so the main thrust area, as I understand, is comprehension of code, as you
Yeah,
as you mentioned, and I was wondering that whether, I mean, whether it is possible to use natural language processing at artificial intelligence to get a get get a like a this sort of a functionality. Of course, the person who is writing the code, he may have some additional things to say, which of course you can add as the graphic or the audio or the whatever you just showed some of the way.
yeah,
But in future, or I don't know whether this functionality is already available, but in future, could a text editor automatically generate also comprehension notes in some sense given a code body?
yeah. That would be a technical enhancement. Currently, for example, if you look at what ChatGPT does, it writes the code for you, but it also explains a lot about the code. Yeah.
Right, right,
So y- currently, it would be a manual thing to copy the code and then maybe do this and add. So after you write the code, you also add a note above with this explanation. So
uh-huh,
something like that. It would be a manual step now, but I imagine that if we, it's just a technician job to do this sort of thing to integrate when you know how to use the APIs. Then
right.
I don't think it is any kind of breakthrough needed for that. It's just a matter
Yeah,
of
just use
using
the
the,
existing tool to call the comprehension, I guess.
yeah. You can have a convention, say, to say that, okay, then the explanation would be written like this. And the advantage is that it does not take up your screen area. It just
Right.
adds it. Oh, there is a spectral feature whereby you automatically convert this into audio. So
I see.
there's a text to speech. It just uses the Windows text to speech converter to convert the notes into audio and add it as audio thing here. Just the way you add audio using the insert audio things, insert recording thing, it just converts the notes into text to speech. And uh, there are many additional features. For example, in many programming contexts, it makes sense to instrument the code so that you can run it and see where the code is going, how many times it's hitting here or there. And there's a lot of support functionality implemented for that. I'll give a glimpse of the top level feature of that. Say this is a C++ code and I want to instrument it with a line. Once I run it, you will see what it looks like once instrumented. So as you can see, it added these extra lines with unique numbers in the calls. So there is a supporting library in many languages that I have written for supporting this feature. This library would include the implementation of this function. And what would happen is when the program runs, it would be calling that instrumentation function. And there is some tooling to look at the data that gets recorded. So if this point is hit once, this point is hit 20 times, this point is never hit. No, this won't happen. This point is hit maybe once, this is hit maybe 100 times or something. That you can see quite easily. So Spectral annotates the code with those information saying, okay, this was hit 100 times, this was hit once, this was never hit. And this sort of information is also very useful in comprehending what is going on. So you have a program with hundreds of files and you don't know how it is getting used, how the code is getting used. Maybe there are lots of dead code that never gets hit. So this sort of instrumented analysis tells you uh, how it is used. So what happens there is you record all these hits and then use that recorded data to annotate the code back. Yeah, so that is one of the features. There are hundreds of features like that, but the top level thing there is instrumentation. Then there is you can also use Spectral as a test suite runner. So you can have a folder containing hundreds of JSON files that you send to REST API, some backend server. Then the panel, this editor panel itself works like a test listing where it goes through each individual JSON. It sends it to the REST API server, and it matches if it compares it with the golden response that you expect, and if the result does not match with the golden response, then it is written as a test failure. So this sort of features exist. And something else I wanted to say. Oh, yeah, there is a white paper that I wrote about the Spectral editor. So the white paper says that there are lots of tools that let you annotate documents. So there are lots of PDF annotation tools or Word file annotation tools, but this is the first one that lets you uh, annotate source code in a way that is very compatible with the text. So by very compatible, I mean the format in which Spectral saves the extra information has a line-to-line correspondence with the source code. That is, every line in the source code corresponds to its corresponding line in the additional file it saves. The additional file is called a highlight file or HLT file. So when you save anything in Spectral, you'll see that a corresponding HLT file gets created. And you can see what the HLT file looks like. So it almost looks like the same thing with some additional information, and that additional information, or the format that captures the additional information, is described here. So the way it does is, so any text in the source file is within a text block or a T block. So anything that is followed by a T is a text that will go verbatim in the text file. In addition, there are some other types of elements, like the S element, which defines a span. If you're familiar with HTML, you probably know about the span element. So this
Right.
S element is just like span.
Mhm.
And this format, this little thing says there is a span called H1 starting, and within that span, there is this text, and then the span ends. There is a slash S. Slash S means it's the end of that element. So it's like a very uh, kind of succinct version of HTML, uh, but it ensures a guarantee that there will be a line-to-line correspondence. That any text that is in line one of the HLT file will correspond to the text that is in line one of the source code. So there will be elements for uh, graphics, there would be elements for audio and things like that here. So far, this one only shows span and text, but you get the idea, right? There can be, you can define additional uh, spans as the editor evolves. Yeah. So as I just wanted to show one more use case, but it's probably already clear. But I just wanted to show this, that suppose you are writing something, let's say a math problem in an HTML, where you want to put a math equation. The the Spectral editor does not itself support LaTeX or anything. It's very simple piece of code, but you can just use those things. You just copy paste those things from uh, other LaTeX composition utilities. So I'll just save this as something, say math. Save this as now. I'll just write something like the mass energy given by the equation. Then I just go here and write something like, this is a website that composes LaTeX. So I just write E equals mc squared, and it writes the composition here. I just copy this image, and where's it just got added here. I'll save this thing and show you what it looks like. So in the Spectral HLT file, so this was the file we just saved, right? So the text file looks just like what you would expect as the text. It doesn't have the additional element, which is the graphics that we added. So if a compiler was to see this, if this was a source code, it just wouldn't have that additional thing. And it's the HLT file that contains what the image is. So here there's an I element which stands for image, and this says, okay, this is the image in the .spectral folder. There is a temporarily generated or randomly generated name of image called blah 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 .png, and that's the one to show here. And if you save it as a HTML file, you can see that this image appears. And if you see the page source, you'll see some boilerplate JavaScript at the beginning, and then the actual thing starts. And here you see the image embedded as a base 64 encoding. And all the highlighting that you do here all also goes nicely into that. There are lots of features that involve the highlighting. You can highlight by regular expressions and unhighlight by regular expressions. As I was saying, there are 250 of them. And I think this is a good uh, use case for teachers, that you might uh, get a assignment where the student has written some code, and you can put additional things in it and then save it as an HTML, a completely self-contained HTML, and then you send it to the student. This was how Shikha was using it when she was teaching in Caledonian University. So she was teaching a programming module, and she was annotating the results. So the source code with comments on how to improve it or what mistakes they have made, and that was quite helpful to the students. Um, so I don't know how much more detail. I think it's I don't
Yeah,
want to go into
I think
further details. Yeah.
this is a very nice introduction. I'll just open the floor then for questions if anyone has any. Otherwise, usually if we get comments later, we can also send it out to you.
Awesome.
I was like thinking about that particular use case that you mentioned at the very end. It
Mm,
seems to me that one of the things that we do at as teachers of mathematics is that we have to grade a lot of work of the students,
yeah.
and when we do that, I mean, if the entire thing is this annotator, I mean, this is like a very advanced annotator in some sense with a lot
Mm.
of other features. So, is there like an is there a plan to make this available in a web-based interface, or is that even possible?
I don't think it is possible unless you have something uh, like a cloud backend for storing these things. So your front end would still be this, because this functionality would take a complete rewrite to make it web based. So
Yeah,
the easy thing to call it somewhat web linked is something that has a maybe S3 backend where the result gets stored as a GUID file, and then you just you have a menu here saying upload, and that gives you a URL, and then you send the URL there. So behind the scenes, it generates the HTML equivalent, uploads to the cloud, and then gives you a URL which you share with others.
I see.
But this itself as a browser based thing, that would be a lot of work. I think it's complete rewrite, I think, because this is
Right.
a very old technology. It doesn't play well with
Okay.
JavaScript.
All right. That is great.
So
Thank you, Joyantada, for your time. And
thank you,
I
Ashwin.
have not yet received any comments so far. So I
Okay,
will just close the discussion for now. But
okay,
but we would love to hear from you about any further, feature additions or any new plans that you may have with this project. Thank
thank
you
you,
again
thank you,
for joining
thank
in
you.
today.
If anyone is interested, I'd be happy to send the download link
Yeah, yeah, of
for this.
course. I am over the top of my head. I have I was thinking that maybe some of the students at Cheenta who are in
Uh,
the computer science program, they
uh,
might want to work on this project and create some plugins with some
uh,
new functionalities. Uh, Maybe that is something that they would like, that they would love to do.
yeah.
So I can share these ideas with them.
Also, when they are writing their assignments or something, or writing their reports, they might want to use this as the medium
Right.
for documenting the code, for example.
Is there a documentation of this entire project?
Not very much. I started writing it, but it's very incomplete. Uh,
Okay. Okay.
yes, it's the boring part. There is this thing is there, the white paper, which
Ah,
goes
right.
through the philosophy of it pretty much, but it's not a command reference. This is more like what are the features. Uh,
Right.
so it,
So
it is,
maybe we can ask some students to do the job,
yeah, that
because
would be awesome.
yeah, that
Did
would
I
add
show
value.
you? Did I show you some examples? Let me show you uh, some files that I sent someone as a showcase of what it does. So let me download these things. Yeah. So this is an example of a code that was written and annotated using Spectral. So what happens here is there was a problem statement which says what you need to do, and here it describes the design using the hyperlink things I demonstrated earlier. It also has the annotations, and also has some situated graphics to show what is going on here
Right.
according to the spec. So this was one demo. Then there was this other demo. I think this was a JavaScript algorithm code, and this shows nicely a documentation that precedes the code, where there is an image and all to describe what is going on. And also there are lots of hyperlinks from the documentation to the part of the code saying, okay, this is where this is going on, this is where that is going on, and things like that. So, and if people are exchanging information on code or even any text where it makes sense to have images, it's like a poor man's Microsoft Word, where you annotate the things. So that could be one use case.
Right.
You So I'm probably repeating myself at this point. Yeah,
No,
I'm.
but that's excellent. Thank you again, and
Thank you so much.
let us close in for today, and hopefully we'll see each other again soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speak to you later.